Does the thought of soldering make you sweat profusely? Make your hands go all clammy? Do you normally run down the model shop to get them to do the soldering for you? Don't panic. This video is definitely for you. In this video, I hope to teach you how to become a soldering god. There are 3 key things you need to be good at soldering. Number 1 is a good solder station. You need at least 60 watt power and you need a variable temperature as well. The second thing you need is good quality solder. I would highly recommend getting 60/40 lead solder. Difficult to get hold of now. I will put a link down below where you can get it on eBay. It's the best place to look for it. Silver solder, it just doesn't flow as well. Third item, whilst not definitely necessary, rosin flux. This just helps in the tinning process, especially when you're doing some bigger jobs. Tools wise, you don't need any special tools. If you can get the helping hand or you have a helping hand, that's great. It does help, but it's not necessary. All you really need is a set of mole grips, alternatively a set of pliers with a rubber band. Then all you do is you put the rubber band around the handle. Look, a gripping tool. How simple and fantastic is that? Your new ESC has arrived and it's got no connections on it. So the first thing you've got to do is solder on the connections. As I said, don't panic. This solder station goes up to 450 degrees. We don't need that sort of heat, so we're going to drop it down to about 485 degrees. Next, we'll get the connector ready. Now, we're only going to be soldering one side of this, but I always highly recommend putting the 2 connectors together. It just helps dissipate the heat, so you don't end up overheating the connector and melting the terminal inside. On an XT90, you should see on the sides, it will tell you which terminal is which. So this is the negative side, and this is the positive side, and it will say it on each part there. So you need to make sure you get these the right way round. Obviously, red on positive, black on negative. So we'll now get these set up in the holding tool that we have. If you've got mole grips, you can grip it like that. Or if you're using the pliers with the elastic band, again, just simply hold it like that. And here, if you want to use a little bit of flux, dab a little bit on the terminal you're about to solder. As I said, it's not absolutely necessary because the solder comes pre-fluxed. It just aids in the flow and the spread of the solder. The next thing we're going to do, we're just going to put a little bit of solder, not a huge amount, on the tip of the soldering iron. You should just see it bead up nicely like that. That's just going to aid the transfer of heat from your solder to the item you're looking to solder. And simply what you're going to do, you're going to put the heat onto the part you want to solder and then start applying the solder over the top of it. Just filling it up slowly. You don't want too much in there, but just filling it up enough. And just move it around a little bit. Pre-tin it. Get it all nicely tinned up. And that is after just a small amount of tinning. That's all you need, just to apply that tinning to the terminal. Prepping it to receive the wire. The other thing you must do after doing this every single time, make sure you clean your tip. So just clean it in your sponge or your solder station cleaning tool, whichever you've got. Do not sand it. Just wipe it gently with that sponge. Make it nice and clean, ready for the next solder. And I really can't stress how important it is to keep that tip nice and clean. Now we're going to prep the wire for soldering. You can apply some flux if you want to. Just makes it a little bit easier whilst you're learning to solder. I'm not going to do it in this case though. So we've got the wire all nicely prepped up, ready, holding it in the mole grips. So it's coming up nicely in a nice position so that we can get to it with the solder nice and easily. I'm going to put a little bit of solder on our soldering iron, aids in the transfer of heat. Then apply it to the end of the wire and then just slowly start feeding the solder onto it, and you will see it start wicking up, going along the wire. Just keep feeding it, moving the solder about to allow that solder to really soak into the wire. So you've got a nice covering of the wire with the solder. Okay, as you can see there, the wire is what we call tinned, so it's got a nice coating of solder all the way around it. Next, we're going to do the actual soldering the 2 parts together. And I know this is the part you all get really worried about. So first of all, what we will do is we'll make sure we put the protector over the top, or if you're using a heat shrink, make sure you put the heat shrink over the top first. And as before, we always put just a little bit of solder on the end of our soldering iron. First thing we're going to do is we'll apply the soldering iron to the connector. Just let it heat up and we should see that solder start melting. Once that's started melting, we then put this wire on the top. We apply the solder iron to the wire. That will start heating up and then it will just melt into the solder underneath it. So just hold it there until it's nicely melted, and then let go. And it really is as simple as that. And there we have it, guys. One nice, clean, tidy, simple solder. We'll do the other side, and I'll just go through that in the same process. Let's just do the other side. Unfortunately, I did video this already, and I didn't press record, so this bit is pre-tinned. But again, it's just a simpler case of putting a bit of solder on your solder iron, getting in there, heating that up, and just applying a little bit of solder. I won't apply a lot here because I've already tinned it. It's already ready to go. I just hadn't recorded it. One of the biggest mistakes people make, and I've done it, I still do it now, but just try to remember to always thread that through the hole as you're coming through, because you don't want to be putting it on, soldering it, and then realise you've forgotten to do it. Although I have done that many, many times. Again, we just heat up the connector there, get it all nice and liquidy. Take the wire, hold it on top, apply the heat. When it starts melting, give it a little wiggle and a woggle. And in she goes. The shinier the connection, the better the connection. If it's really, really dull, means you've got a dry solder. You want to avoid dry solders at all costs. Then you can just slide that over the top. I won't click it in because I'm not going to be using this, but click it in. Take this end off. It is still hot, so be careful where you touch it because these ends will be hot as well. But you can take that off. There we have it. One XT90 connector, all nicely soldered up. How easy was that? And you're worrying and panicking about it. It's really not that hard with the right equipment. And then you're saying, well, David, that's all well and good, but I've just bought a pair of LiPo batteries and they've come with the wrong connector. What do I do about that? Let me show you. So here we have a 3S LiPo that came with an XT90 connector. But I don't want XT90, I want ECIC5s. Now the first thing to remember when soldering a LiPo battery is you seriously cannot stress this enough. You do not want these two wires to touch, because if you do, it's going to be a... But as I said before, there's no need to panic. Just take precautions. First thing we've got to do is we've got to get this connector off. And what a lot of people will do is they will come along and they will cut it off. And first of all, if you are going to cut it off, do not cut both at the same time, because again, what will happen? But in addition, every time you cut this wire back, you're making it shorter and shorter and shorter. There really is no reason to cut the wires off. Let's take this protector off. And there we can see we have got a nice clean solder because it came from the factory like this. So the first precaution we're going to do is the one we're not working on, we are going to tape up. We just take a small amount of this electrical tape. We wrap it around the terminal and the wire so that nothing is exposed still. Now hidden it, so even if this wire falls off or whatever we do to it, it cannot touch this terminal here. What we're now going to do is we're now going to desolder this from here so we keep the full wire. The added benefit of this is the wire is also pre-tinned. Now, as with every time you're about to start soldering, just a small amount of solder on the end of your tip. And then we will just hold the soldering iron onto the solder, let that heat transfer, and you will soon see the solder here start to melt. And once it's melted, all nice and runny. Don't leave the heat on there too long. But once it's all melted like this, you can see it's all runny, you should then just be able to pull that wire off. Simple as that. And what we're not going to do at this stage, we are not going to desolder this side. We really don't want two loose wires flinging around where they can touch each other. What we will do instead is we'll prep this and get this soldered up into the ICEC5. The first thing I like to do is always, whilst this is pre-tinned, I still like to apply some of my own solder, the 6040. We don't know what quality solder's been used here. It may not flow very well, in which case you might struggle again to do your soldering. So just add a little bit of your own solder. Now the method for soldering the ECIC5 is slightly different because they come with these all metal bullets. And what you really don't want to be doing is you really don't want to be putting something metal on here, because it just makes more area for the heat to transfer to. It just makes it harder for you to heat this item up. So instead, what we're going to do is we've drilled a hole in a piece of wood, and we'll just slot that into that piece of wood there. Nice and easy, holds it in there nicely. On the side you will see it's got a negative and a positive. Black is the negative, so we will slot that through there. Heat this up until it's molten again, nice and liquidy. And we're just going to slide this wire in and then apply the heat over the top until everything's melted. We don't have to worry about applying too much heat here because we're going into wood, so we're not going to melt anything. Just apply that on there. Make sure it's all melted, all liquidy. Then we can let go. So everything's cooled down. Now the heat cool down will take a little bit longer because we're just being held by wood. We have heated that up a lot. There we can see it's now cooled down enough. Don't touch it because it will be hot. Hopefully you can see in there. We've got a nice shiny connection. So it's nicely cooled down now. So we will just slide this into the sheath. Put it on your little bit of wood here. Take your 3mm hex. Give it a little tap with the pliers. And you'll hear a little click. That is now securely in place. That is not coming out of there. Now this connector, this negative terminal, is all nicely hidden away, protected. We can now undo this side. We've not got any fears of the two coming into contact with each other. Now we'll desolder this side as well. Wait for it to start melting. You'll see it bubbling around in there, but you want to wait until the heat is transferred. The bit you're holding it to is all gone nice and fluidy, as you can see there. And just apply a little bit of movement and off she comes. Really is as simple as that to desolder. Let's tin up the connector. Okay, first of all we make sure, because I almost forgot myself this time, make sure we thread through, make sure it's going through the positive. Preheat, get it nice and molten. This time I will be holding the wire with the pliers because this method does get a little bit hot where you're applying so much heat. And then just hold it on top there, slide it in. Let it all go molten in there and then let go and hold until it sets. Looks perfect to me. Wait for that to cool down. You can see a nice clean solder in there. Pull that up and through, put it on the block, a couple of little taps. And you hear a click, you know it's in there. And there we have it, a nice EC IC5 connection, nice and tidy, clean and crisp. One final tip, always make sure you clean the tip off every single time, even after use. Just give it a little bit of clean, nice and clean. You don't want your tip to get damaged or dirty at all. So there we have it, guys. Hopefully you found that helpful and you are now also a soldering god. So if you wouldn't mind leaving a comment down below and just letting me know how you found this video, whether it was helpful or not.